Welcome back to another episode of Performance Talks. And yes, it is Bryson Sullivan himself, the natural paradigm. He is back. I know you all been waiting like you're always waiting. And listen, a little bit longer this time, but for good reason. Bryson has been gone from the family, and now he's back for a good family reunion. Bryson, tell these good people what you got popping so they can get locked in.
I'm not very exciting at all. Okay. The only real difference I would say between the last time we talked is that we did actually start a new podcast. It's called the Tech Heads F1 podcast with myself, Dr. Obbs, and Molly. Is really an F1 focused podcast, like I'm sure many people are familiar with, but it's more focused on the technical subjects than we might get into otherwise, right? So there may be some details that I might leave out when we talk about technical stuff here and in other podcasts. And there's entire topics we just wouldn't talk about in the normal topics of conversation, like F ducks and nerders and all kind of stuff like that, that we do try to talk about on that podcast. And I've been lucky enough to have some fun guests come by. I can't reveal who they are just yet, but when the episode is released, we'll see.
Okay, so that's a good point. So we really are like you're diving into a lot of technical over there, and that's your focus. And you also recently added a third host, right? So you got Dr. Hobbs and you, and then you got the third co-host coming on. So can you announce to say who that is, or
yeah, it's Molly. Molly is the third host. Molly, yeah, she's been very good. Molly Oxner. She's powertrains engineer for an OEM over here in the States, but really well versed in the technical stuff and definitely helping with the conversations.
Okay, and what I will do for you all to make it easy, because you know the least path of resistance is usually where things travel. So I will put a link to that podcast in the description, so you will always be able to access it so long as that URL link works, and you can go straight to Bryson's podcast, go over there, support them, take a listen in if you want to hear more technical stuff. And today we're going to get into a little bit of tech, maybe, but more of all the other stuff that's going on around the grid, the paddock, and all the other good stuff. So we're going to talk about Nick DeVries putting people on notice. How do you feel about Nick's performance? I felt he put people on notice. I felt he made Latifi definitely exposed Latifi for to me the paid driver seat he is. He's like, now what is he ranked 21 out of 20 drivers on the grid? Nick DeVries comes off the couch in the motorhome to the damn paddock in a car and puts Williams on point. So how do you feel?
Even worse, it's actually even worse than that. But he actually came out of someone else's car and into their car to do it.
That's right.
You know, because he was driving for Aston Martin in FP1.
Right.
Look, I don't think anyone really thought that Latifi's career would go beyond this year, but it's hard to imagine a more definitive point at which that became clearly what was going to happen than DeVries' run in Monza. I don't think you could ask for a better weekend for him. And his weekend was so good. It's not just that he would be a shoo-in for the Williams seat. He's actually in the running for the Alpine seat, or potentially another seat that would come as a result of the musical chairs that would have come as a result of that. So he had an extraordinary weekend, and I think probably what's most impressive about it is I think in the first practice he went out in FP3, he went wide in the first Lesmo, and people were like, oh, maybe he can't do it and blah, blah, blah. He's just finding the limits, right? If you have a driver that never crashes or never even goes off, they're probably not pushing hard enough early on, especially in his particular situation where he didn't know what the absolute limit of that particular car would be at Monza. He had to get familiar quick. And as a result of that, you maybe go a little bit further over the limit. Right. But to be able to not only have the ultimate pace that he needed to have in qualifying, but to defend that entire race, especially against Guan Yu Zhou. And we saw him after the race. He was physically drained. I know he's a professional racing driver. He won F2 and he was racing in Formula E, but that is a completely different class of physicality to Formula One, because F1 is singular, really. There's nothing like that in terms of G-forces for cars. So yeah, he definitely is putting everyone on notice. And I think, what is that meme where you have like the bunch of dominoes? It's like a little one and then the big one. The small one is Alex Albon saying my stomach hurts, and the big one is Nick DeVries confirmed 2023. It was a wild 48 hours.
That was. Do you at all think maybe how do you feel? I'm going to ask you this. How did you feel about the Colton Herter situation, and then with the mixture of Nick going out there doing what he done? Because my whole point of view was I'm not hating on the Colton Herter move. Like if it's possible and he can get in, I'm always on the level or appreciative of somebody progressing in their field, right? But the thing was, there was this talk that kind of overshadowed that to me about fudging numbers for him to get in based off his super license. Now, maybe they missed a couple of seasons, wasn't there, and people debate if he would have been there, he probably would have had these points. But the fact is, he didn't have the points, or else we wouldn't be talking about him trying to get it. I just felt that there were other options like Nick, like Sargent, like Dragovich. I just felt there were other options that were right there within that grasp, within that lane that should have been considered first, not to tell a team what to do, but I just felt like that was a bit far with so much talent that I think is up and coming that could have been accessed. How do you feel about that whole situation?
All of the other drivers that you mentioned, apart from DeVries, are in feeder series.
Right.
They're in F2 and they have their own histories in F3. IndyCar is not a feeder series, is where I would start with that question. The ranking for where IndyCar probably should be in terms of the points that should be granted for it in comparison to other things is really not accurate. And the other question is about the FIA and Formula One following rules, right?
There we go.
We don't even have to talk about the farce of Abu Dhabi to have an example of when they don't follow the rules. We can be more specific about super license points.
Right.
We can talk about situations when I don't want to say it was a complete fudging of rules, but when drivers were given special opportunities to drive a car when they really should not have necessarily been able to, based on their number of super license points that they had. Now, granted, that's probably because their own series weren't weighted heavily enough. We had Haryanto, I think it was, in Suzuka one of the past years, who had an opportunity to race, and that's probably because they didn't give enough points to Super Formula as well. I mean, it's the same kind of argument. I understand the strict idea behind saying the rules don't say X, therefore we can't do X in this current situation. And the best way to remedy that would be to fix the rules to accommodate them, to actually make it an appropriately weighted point factor for the series that they're racing in. And he could maybe have a door open for, if not 2023, then 2024. In terms of other drivers, you mentioned the DeVries and some of the others. Some people were even talking about other IndyCar drivers. Why not Dixon? Why not Newgarden and others? And I think I wanted to point out to people is that Formula One teams have their own motivations for choosing who they want to have.
True.
And in a particular seat. This is in terms of driver salary, experience level, how they think they will get along with their teammates, all those other things. If a team was genuinely interested in Colton Herta, and Colton Herta specifically,
Right.
then that's up to them. They wanted to have him in there. The question is, what is the right way to do it? And yeah, it seems like that super license point was a sticking issue. I can understand it from the pure point of view of saying the regulations, he didn't have enough points for right now. If you wanted to change that, it would be modifying the regulations for the super license itself, or it would be, taking another route. But primarily, I would just say that it's fine if he didn't get in, but he's definitely a very talented driver.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I definitely think so. I watch IndyCar too. So that's why I say I'm not opposed to. The rules and the breaking of the rules for these situations that they think are warranted, and then not for other situations. Just like we had in Monza, we finished the race behind a safety car. I thought we was doing motor racing. Evidently not. I felt they made the right decision. I just was why you didn't make that right decision beforehand in Abu Dhabi when it was clearly. And also, I always tell people I always like to look at somebody's character. Like in the same type of situation, I'm going to look at your character and see if you're the same depending on what position you was. Now, when Max was in Abu Dhabi and they were talking about finishing behind safety car, he was opposed to that. Like he wasn't feeling it. He was like, yeah, of course they would do something like that. Here, they finished behind the safety car. He was good with it. He's all good with it. Like I said, I think they made the right decision in Monza, the wrong decision in AD, and I think that is something that should be observed. How did you feel about that situation?
Yeah, here's what has to be said about that. People wonder why we still talk about Abu Dhabi, why it's even in the conversation still. And I think it's the obviousness of how wrong it is that makes it so compelling. It's not like there is a third or a fourth option where maybe this could be right and maybe this could be wrong. It's not. It's just completely wrong. There's a completely wrong way to try to operate the safety car and lapped cars. it's the obviousness of that makes it so salient. And
Okay.
anytime the rules actually are followed correctly, it only adds to the juxtaposition of how wrong it was previously. And it
Right.
brings to a head this idea that, okay, that was definitely wrong. It definitely shouldn't have happened that way. There's no way we're going to change it. Huh? It's like that's why it's kind of an issue. But in
Right.
terms of Monza itself, as soon as Daniel Ricciardo's McLaren was unable to find neutral and they didn't know how to actually get it into neutral, that delay combined with the delay of the safety car picking up Russell instead of Verstappen in the queue,
Right.
those two things together were potentially unexpected things that would lead you to believe that you could have maybe gotten rid of the safety car and had a few green laps. But those two things made it really impossible to do so. Now, so basically, I'm totally fine with the way the safety car ended under the correct
Right.
procedures. You could make an argument from safety grounds that maybe it would have been best because you had to bring out that digger crane to actually
Hmm.
get his car out. We never really like to see cars driving past cranes at high speed.
Right.
They weren't really that high speed, but you still, anything can happen.
There you
I
go.
could understand the rationale behind saying, let's have a red flag because I don't want cars to drive past this digger. I would understand that as well, and it would
Point.
be totally explicable why they would do that. Obviously, there's some discussion about should we have an automatic red flag rule like other racing series have, where if there is some kind of on track incident with like 5 laps to go or 5% of the laps to go, whatever is closer, automatically red flag it to guarantee that you get some amount of green flag racing.
Okay.
And the reaction to that is usually along the lines of, "This isn't WWE. This is Formula One. Let's not, over prioritize entertainment in our motorsports."
Right.
And to an extent, I'm actually kind of sympathetic to that. But at the same time, we're already tacitly consenting to that to a degree right now
Right.
with the 2022 aero regulations, right? The 2022 aero regulations are not about improving the ultimate performance of the cars. It's about allowing them to race each other more effectively
More
because it's a better
effectively.
show,
Right.
right? I think the key difference here is that we all agree to those rules before the season starts, and then we just kind of race within that construct, and we're not
Right.
necessarily changing stuff on the fly. So I can understand the objections to an idea about a red flag rule at the end of a race. It only happens very rarely, like 12 times in the last like 20 years or whatever.
Yeah, I saw that.
But it's something to consider. But to be clear, I don't have any objections to either the way the race ended in reality, or if they had decided to red flag it on safety grounds for the digger crane. Those would both be fine options for me.
I also agree. I agree with the red flag situation due to the fact I felt like people there, the car's still partially on the track. You got to get this crane out. You got marshals on. I felt like red flag would have been cool with me. The safety car situation, right decision, although juxtaposed, like we said, to AD 2021, not a very good taste. But since we're here and we're talking about safety cars and on track, uh, I, myself, and many of my viewers, whether subscribed or members or not, have tossed around the idea of, since we have recently had some with Colton, this convergence of IndyCar and Formula One and the fudging about the fact that IndyCar closes their pit lane when a safety car is out. I'm not opposed to that being the case in Formula One, although I think it takes some things away about the little nuances and things they could do with strategy. I've seen more. I've seen, especially this season, not more, but especially this season, given the example with Russell and between Lewis, of the safety car benefiting certain drivers, and then Charles getting kind of screwed with the safety car situation as he goes in, and then he's in pit lane and it goes green and they lose some time. How do you feel if Formula One were to be adopt the closing of the pit lane on safety car situations?
I think Formula One is ultimately whatever we decide we want it to be, right? It's what do we want to get out of it? If we feel like, on average, we don't like to see people be aggressively disadvantaged by some safety car situation, whether it's losing time in the pit lane or if it's a red flag, changing tires and all these things, or even changing wings sometimes under
Right.
red flag. That's a question for the teams to debate, and maybe they can have a dialogue with fans to think what fans think. I think the classical argument has always been on balance over the course of a season or several seasons, this tends to even out. You may tend to be disadvantaged by a safety car this time, but you will be advantaged by it in the next time. And as long as the safety car rules are followed, that's okay. It's when they start breaking them that we have issues.
Right.
So I actually don't have a problem with the way that it is, just because I almost kind of like the idea of big changes in position coming from
Right.
random events that
Right.
may be bad on an individual driver, but that doesn't really bother me in principle. The most important thing is just agreeing to a set of rules and sticking to them. That's what I would focus on.
And that is where the focus is. And I think we've heard quite a bit. It seems like things have been consistently inconsistent. And I think a lot of fans are tired of that. Whether you're OG fan or new fan, I think seeing just certain rules you get and then just seeing them change. And often, like you made a very good point, the safety car situation has a tendency to balance itself out throughout the course. And that's true in many sports, and certain rules and regulations has a tendency to balance out. You got a football, they make certain calls now, and then by the end of the season, it's like, it balanced out. It really, yeah, you didn't like it then, but now you're at a point where you're going into the playoffs because of a similar situation, but now it's in your advantage. So I think you made a very good point on that. And let's switch gears right here and talk about Williams with Doralton. I think it's capital or financials, and the fact that Porsche and Red Bull have seemed to be at a odds in on this deal that was supposed to be. How do you feel about that? And what do you think the possibilities of Porsche possibly acquiring Williams? And now this is hypothetically, because this is just what I'm thinking. I'm thinking the fact that Williams is owned by a financial investment company, and investment companies like to make money. All right. I can't even find a connection to Doralton. And I've looked for one. Like, is there a Formula One connection? Is there somebody who owns the team or invested in the team that actually purchased Williams through Doralton? Like, I can't make any connection. So my only legitimate thing is, I know it's a financial company. I know they invest and they like to try to see money. And if Porsche was in the market to actually try to get an entire team along with their power unit, would they be up for possibly purchasing Williams? So how do you feel about the break of Red Bull, and how would you feel if Porsche purchased Williams?
So this question about Red Bull and Porsche seems to be a marriage that makes sense on paper, but in
Right.
fine details there seem to be some disagreements. And I don't know what the exact nature of their disagreement is, but I imagine that with the paperwork that was released about the 50% merger and the considerable amount of control that Porsche wanted in Red Bull, there probably were some disagreements over personnel switching,
Okay.
or related to who controls what and what the identity of the team really is. I
Right.
think when Red Bull sat down and really thinks about what 50% really could mean, that might be too much for them, even.
Right.
That actually may have been, there may even been key figures that may have been shifted out because of Porsche's involvement. So
Right.
Porsche definitely is interested in Formula One. There's a market for it. Audi is in. It would make the total sense. The new power unit regulations are tailor made for OEMs to join the sport. So that's happening. The question is, who do they partner up with? You mentioned Williams, and if you're asking what the connection is between Doralton and Williams, I think it's just people know Formula One, and they may even be fans of Formula One, and said we can make this work, for our portfolio. I actually think that I would like to see Porsche team up with Andretti, to be honest, right? Because this question of Andretti has always perplexed me as to why it's been rejected over and over and over again. We keep hearing these things from Stefano Domenicali and others of the reasons why the team can't be accepted, why their entry can't be accepted.
Right.
They want to have OEMs. They want to have the stability of an OEM and their involvement in the sport and to add value. And then we have this Porsche deal evaporate in real time with Red Bull,
Right.
proving that this idea that this hypothesis that you get more stability with OEM involvement as opposed to a privateer or whatever you call it, it's just not correct. OEMs enter and leave the sport all the time, and it's not going to change. But I think that if there is some underlying reluctance of Formula One to add Andretti as another team, I'm not going to speculate as to why that is, but
Right.
it's there. That would be improved significantly with teaming up with Porsche. because Formula One already wants to work with Porsche to begin with, right?
True.
Andretti is trying to get into F1 as quickly as they can, and it would be hilariously transparent for Formula One to say, Porsche, you've teamed up with Andretti, but suddenly I don't want you in the sport now. Right?
Right.
Like that, the argument doesn't stand up to scrutiny in the way that it doesn't stand up to scrutiny now, to be perfectly frank, but it would stand up to scrutiny even less with a partnership with Porsche. Not only that, but there are many reasons why an increased involvement in the U.S. markets in terms of Grand Prix in Miami, Las Vegas, etc. Mm-hmm. There are many reasons why that can't grow in an unbounded way without having some increased representation in the sport itself, either in terms of teams or drivers or what have you. So, and we already have Haas, but Haas is its own entity. We can do more, and I would always prefer to have another team come onto the grid. Yes. As opposed to remanaging an existing team.
Exactly.
Because it's not just space for drivers, it's space for engineers and team principals.
Yeah,
and
there are a lot of jobs.
Entire infrastructure there. Exactly. That's exactly what I want to see. So regarding Williams, Porsche probably could link up with Williams, but I would rather see a new entry with Andretti Porsche.
Now that would be dope. I would be all for that. I definitely would be all for that. So there has been other talk. Now, I'll ask you this question first so we can go ahead and get it out the way. How did you feel about the AlphaTauri Instagram or Twitter post? How did you feel about that? It seems to have rubbed people somewhat the wrong way. Some people like, what are they doing? Some people were confused on, what is the connection there? Did you see it? If you did see it, how did you feel about it?
I did see it, and
a lot of diversity talk, and if they felt like maybe somebody in the diversity team should have known a little bit better than to maybe release that type of post.
Sometimes you can't explain exactly why something rubs you the wrong way, but the inability to articulate exactly what's wrong with something doesn't make it right, first of all. Secondly, there is a unique culture around the GTA series of games anyway, and the way that they depict certain parts of the community, and everyone seems to have reached an equilibrium as far as how they feel people are being represented and everything else. But when you talk about Formula One specifically, is a space where there is a notable lack of black and brown people at all to begin with. People are there, but you don't always see them. And we don't see an overabundance of them in the posts of AlphaTauri and other people necessarily. It just seemed kind of weird that the first time we saw that from this team, what I'm looking at are people in colors, effectively, and this isn't the type of depiction that I was expecting to see as their first way to describe this. Now, to be clear, I understand the meme, right? I understand the game, and I understand how that makes sense in the context of what they were going for. But as you say, if there was more representation in the departments that was actually putting stuff out, you might say, maybe not.
Maybe not.
Maybe this is something that, at a minimum, could use more thought into how it could be portrayed in terms of how it makes people feel and how they feel represented in a sport where you really don't see a lot of people that look like them. So I don't think there's any malicious intent there at all. I think it's just a question of not being responsive to certain types of factors, and someone else in the room may have been if they were there.
Right. Definitely. I definitely feel that. I definitely do. And it seems like along with Williams and Haas, and I would also say even now Aston Martin, that I don't know if things are being quite thought out the best. What do you think Alonso brings to Aston Martin? What do you think he brings to Aston Martin by going there? And do you think Aston Martin did themselves a disservice by not acquiring new up-and-coming talent, or talent that has come out of the feeder series are already there? Do you think they really just kind of put themselves in a similar situation acquiring Alonso for next season in the absence of Vettel?
Just to be clear, I think that Alonso making his own moves makes sense for him because his priority isn't even necessarily the pace of the car on today. It's a question of how much do you respect him and what kind of deal are you willing to give him? Are you going to give him a multi-year deal that he wants, or are you not going to do it? If that's a sticking point, if Alpine was not willing to give it to him, if they're going to give him like a 1+1 instead of
Yep.
a 2+1 or something like that, if that's a sticking point and someone else says, hey, listen, I just want you in my team, I will give you whatever you want and I will pay you whatever you want,
Right.
it's totally fine. I totally understand Fernando going over there. In terms of Aston Martin, what are they gaining from getting him in the car? Fernando is a spicy character. Everybody knows this. Everybody kind of knows his profile. But there's no question that he's a very, very talented driver. And even if the inter-team relationships aren't always perfect, he's getting a high fraction of the potential out of that car, much more so than someone else might do. Not only do you have that, but you have the cachet, I would say,
Okay.
of having a two-time world champion that beat Michael Schumacher in your team. Those are all good
Right.
things. And as we saw in the comparison with Latifi and De Vries at Williams, the reality is that there's no limit to the amount of time a bad driver can lose you. Okay? If you put the wrong person in your car, you can't tell the difference between, is the car fundamentally flawed or is my driver not getting the most out of it? I think I can understand Lawrence Stroll's desire to put a known quantity in the car and say, if it's not going quickly, it's on the team, not on Fernando, at least in terms of raw pace. So I think that actually makes sense. I think Alpine really kind of dropped the ball in several ways with that entire situation. They seemed to think they had more power in the negotiations than they did.
Right.
And they also kind of jerked around some of their parties in the Piastri situation as well. There are better ways that could have been handled, I think.
I firmly believe that, and I've been saying that since the beginning. Alpine definitely dropped the ball. I felt like if you knew I understand like Alonso, and you made very good points about Alonso being a known factor. We're not saying that he's gonna necessarily bring you a championship, but let's all be objective. Alonso is a two-time champion. Alonso by far has the longest career, and that's a record they keep repeating every damn GP. And that is a variable. Similar teams do that. Like, you know what? If these receivers, we're not getting receiving yards, let's bring in a solid quarterback. We know what's up. If we bring this quarterback in and y'all still dropping balls, then we got to change out these receivers or the coach. You got to go one of the two, but you have to get some type of standard in there to try to problem solve. So do you still think, although with Piastri making the move, which I liked it, I enjoyed it, the fact that I always like a little bit more power coming back towards the athletes versus the machine is what I call it. So I'm not opposed to that. But even with that being so, I felt like maybe Piastri did what was best for him and what he could do. But I also think that maybe, it's almost like if the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, it's because the damn water bill's high as hell. All right. And going to McLaren might just be that. Now, I'm not saying he's not going to go there and perform, because I always wish him the best. Any driver going to be, I mean, I hate to see somebody be without a career, but I don't think you're going to get as much leniency or understanding from McLaren than he would have got from Alpine, being the fact that Alpine had invested so much in him as far as what they call grooming, although they screwed themselves with trying to keep Alonso there and start trying to hold Piastri there. I still think maybe Alpine was a better opportunity for him, given he comes to the grid and does perform. But if Piastri goes up and he balls out, then it's cool. But what do you think about that? About that perspective? I mean, you got to ball out.
I think that someone did the math on calculating what fraction of Oscar Piastri's junior career was actually funded by Alpine, and it was like 20%. I mean, it was a large percentage in the last couple of years, to be sure, but I think other parties could stake a claim to helping him survive in the lower categories and helping him. But no, I think that decision was kind of interesting, but this is what he wanted, right? Piastri wanted to go to a team where he believed that he could be a good fit. And again, this is not a pure question of grass is always greener, because if you look at how McLaren and Alpine are doing in the championship, Alpine's ahead, really.
Right.
Alpine's ahead of McLaren. So it's not even like he's just going to a team that's inherently better. This is how we know that there were factors going on behind the scenes beyond just a question of car performance. It was a question of what did Piastri himself need and want in his career, and when was a reasonable time to be able to be guaranteed a seat. My understanding is that Alpine was not able to guarantee him a seat before 2025 or 2026. And that's just, I can understand someone who says that's just too long. That's too long. And I wanted a firm contract. You didn't give it to me. So the opportunity became, to go somewhere else. And I'm going. And again, it's not purely a question of, is this car going to be faster? Now, that being said, Landon Norris's stock has been rising over time. It was rising in 2020 and then 2021 as well when he was getting these great results.
So much hope this year.
And it's certainly rising now with the way that he performed against Daniel Ricciardo, someone who competed level with Max Verstappen in their time at Red Bull together. And in fact, Max Verstappen was someone who kind of eventually was the reason why Daniel Ricciardo felt like he wasn't getting the attention that he needed. And he went to Renault. But essentially, Daniel Ricciardo is very highly rated. And we understand that the peculiarities of the McLaren design made it a little bit more difficult for Ricciardo to deal with them. But that doesn't take away from Lando. Lando's driving incredibly, and for Piastri to go into that environment is a pressure cooker. It's not as much of a pressure cooker as Lewis Hamilton going against Fernando Alonso in 07, right. but it's a high level, right? I mean, either you're going to demonstrate that you really are the real deal, you have a generational talent, or there will be nowhere to hide, right?
Right.
So I don't have any problem with that. And honestly, I think if you were to talk to Oscar about that, he probably wouldn't want it any other way. Give him the best opportunity, give him the best profile for car and team that he can get. Right. And if you're going up against someone that everyone values highly, if you beat them, okay, now you're in a really good position and you can ride that for many years afterwards.
That's a true fact. That is a fact. And that's a very good perspective, right? You perform against higher levels of opponents, of course you're going to be respected, versus like if Georgia pays let's say Conyers State $4 million to come play the game, like nobody's really like, we expected it to be a blowout, you know what I'm saying? Like, and now if Conyers State beats you, then we're like, oh well, what's up with Georgia? You know what I'm saying? But if Georgia beats you, we're not worried about it. So that's a very good point. So jumping back to the deals with our German friends as far as Audi and them coming in as power unit, but also the team. Do you think that there's going to be the acquisition of Sauber as far as the chassis and then Alfa Romeo on their way out? Do you think that that's something that's going to happen? Because I feel like that is the team that is going to be, and I expected to see other people there, but we already talked about that. So how do you feel about Audi's entry and them acquiring that chassis?
Yeah, the deal with Alfa Romeo has always been a branding deal, right? Mm-hmm. It's always been about having a name on the car. It's never been about intellectual property. Right. It's never been about design information being transferred, right? That's going to be a fundamental difference in the situation with the Audi team. So really what we're talking about is Sauber Technologies, really, based in Hinwil, and their interaction with Audi and how they would work together. And that actually makes a lot of sense if you think about where Sauber is headed and where Audi is. It's not as far as you might think, and there are a lot of ways in which the synergy there would actually work in ways that it might not work for like an Italian-based team or a UK-based team or something like that. There's reasons why it could really work well for them. And so I think that's going to be potentially a very powerful combination. I think Sauber has a lot of advanced engineering tools and experience, and to infuse that with a genuine engine manufacturer that also is adding their own takes to integrating the engine with the chassis and fuel mapping and all those other kind of cool things, I think it could potentially be a very strong combination. Now, granted, I think Audi may have made a classic mistake when they announced their plans. They kind of have one of these like 5-year plan type of deals that they say to their investors, like, we're going to be fighting for a championship in 5 years.
Yeah.
It's a mistake that Aston Martin's made. It's a mistake that others have made as well. And I'm not saying they can't do that, but the history of teams who've alleged to do that when they join the sport is not particularly good. Now, to be clear, there are things in place now that should make it easier, right? 2026 engine power unit regs should help. Sliding scale and the cost cap should help. You get certain allocations for a new engine manufacturer. You know,
Yes.
there are several things there that I think could be on their side, but they have their work cut out for them. And I don't know why they're already picking fights with Mercedes. Have you noticed that in their social media and stuff? They're already like,
No, bro, stop
yeah,
playing.
no, there's this weird thing going on with Mercedes and Audi to figure out which is the most German brand. It's very strange.
Now we did hear hints of that doing a thing. Like we heard commentators saying that they're having a German PU with a German team, and then that's where I was going to get with you later. With is it possible that Mick makes his way over when Audi comes in? Is that going to be a possibility?
Sauber's not in Germany. They're in
With
Austria,
Audi, as
but
far as the Audi branding,
yeah, or yeah, it's
because right
possible.
now
I
think
think
it's
I
kind
think
of
we
debatable if he's going to even be with Haas right at this point in time. And then I heard a little bit about Joe hasn't solid his contract yet, so
I think Zoe is probably going to get in. He hasn't done
I like it.
anything. He hasn't done anything that would indicate to me that he shouldn't be in.
Right.
And we haven't really been talking about it that much. But Valtteri's been kind of on a downward trajectory for a couple of races. He's looking for kind of a biggish result. Joe is certainly doing well enough against Valtteri to
Yeah,
justify his place. Is where I would say
I agree.
that point is. But also about Mick, I think we are overestimating the value of driver nationality and team nationality. A
Mm,
lot of people like to put those things together because it seems like it would make sense.
makes sense.
But a lot of the times, I feel like the return on investment of that, in terms of actual on-track performance, just doesn't match. I mean, try to imagine the most German team imaginable, which would be Mercedes in
Mercedes.
2010 to 2012, had Nico Rosberg and
Oh,
Michael Schumacher and Mercedes. Now, to be
yeah,
clear, Mercedes has run out of Brackley and Brixworth. It's really an English team, but with
yeah,
German money, and we know how that situation is run. But
right.
you know that wasn't really the most successful era of Mercedes, and it really didn't take. It took Lewis to join and a few other things to change for them to really find their stride. So I don't know where Mick's going to go, but I'm interested in the idea of him being open to other places that don't necessarily have German affiliation. That's how I would put it.
All right. So
I
if
said
not,
Austria before about Sauber, by the way.
yeah,
They're in Switzerland. That's sorry.
no, that's
They're
cool.
in Switzerland.
That's cool. So so Audi, Sauber, you think that that's going to be a pretty good strong pairing, right? Um, so if that is the case, like we've already heard about Daniel being a Mercedes, a reserve driver, Lewis saying that I think he's not done, and I would agree. So where do we see these drivers? Where do you, if you had to place them somewhere, and even keep in mind if hypothetically Porsche and Andretti combine and come, where do you see Mick? Where do you see Valtteri? Where do you see Daniel Ricciardo?
Valtteri is going to stay where he is
Okay,
in
so
the
he stays at
Sauber
Sauber.
team. I don't think that's going to change.
Okay,
I would love to see Daniel Ricciardo at a Porsche Andretti
mm,
team up. That would be
okay,
very cool to me. I think Daniel's always, taken to the United States. He's always been well liked here, well regarded here. I think a team with an American affiliation would be a perfect fit for him, especially a team that's looking to find its feet, get one established driver and one new driver. I think that pairing could really work out for them. I'm not exactly sure about the other one. I mean, this silly season has been so particularly silly
yes,
that it's hard to even keep track of the moving pieces. We have so many drivers moving around and reserve roles and the possibility of new teams years down the line and who's taking a year off and who's not. You know, just as a small example of this, there was a time when it was said that there's no way that Pierre Gasly would leave AlphaTauri. And now I check the feeds and things to see what's going on in the news, and it almost seems like it's a done deal,
with
right?
Alpine.
And he's going to Alpine, and Nick DeVries is going to AlphaTauri to take his seat. And I haven't seen that confirmed anywhere else, but
Right.
the fact that people are talking about it as being a certainty so openly just gives us a hint as to how wildly this is fluctuating. Now,
Indeed.
regarding Danny Rick being a reserve driver for
Mercedes.
Mercedes, that's an interesting proposition. I think officially Nick DeVries has that role, so it
Okay.
would be open if DeVries took a spot at AlphaTauri or at Williams or anywhere else.
Right.
So that could work, but I would actually like to see Daniel in a race seat again.
I was that's what I was just about to say. I just don't see Danny done. I mean, I know in comparison to Lando, I haven't seen the best performance out of him since the moves, and I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's environment. I don't know if it's maybe a downward spiral just mentally, and he's got to be picked up. But I just don't see Daniel done. Like I just don't see that. I don't see that from him. Like, oh yeah, he's washed. Mick, I'm kind of on the verge of like maybe he just hasn't been given an opportunity that would show us like there's a difference when you perform on lower teams, right? You do something, maybe it's not right, then you get a chance. Now, if you step up to a team, everybody knows, like we were talking about this variable, like we know this car is good. We know what this car can do. And you get it and it's far worse than it was. And we're going on a downward slope. Then the car, I'm not saying it was the best, but damn it, it wasn't that bad. You know what I'm saying? So what do you think about Mick's trajectory as far as his career? If he ends up out of Haas, what do you think about his trajectory? Is it going up, or is it like he's just gonna get another shot, or he's kind of on his way working down on that and out?
So I think when Mick Schumacher was making his way through the lower formula, it was kind of an accepted reality that it takes a bit of time for him to find his feet at whatever level. And maybe a second season is a better reflection of his abilities than the first one. Right. The only reason that someone would get that opportunity is probably because of their name and affiliation. I can't imagine how many drivers don't get a second year because to show their abilities. So that's a whole separate question.
Right.
But Mick is generally a good driver. The question is, how good is he, and what is the expectation level for teams to actually want him? So think of Ferrari, for example. I don't think Ferrari would be interested in signing Mick Schumacher unless he was a Charles Leclerc type of driver, right? That category of skill. I don't think he's at that skill level. And I think his racing with Kevin Magnussen on weekends when they can be compared is evidence of that. I mean, there's been an argument that Nikita Mazepin's existence on the Formula One grid lengthened Nicholas Latifi's and Mick Schumacher's careers by a year. Because they weren't there was another comparison that couldn't be made, and you weren't the worst person on the grid, and you know, Latifi now has the unenviable distinction of being 21st in a 20 driver championship, as you mentioned. But in terms of Mick Schumacher, I think there could be a fit for him somewhere. I think a third year is really like the deciding year for most people. It's usually like, okay, so if you can't produce the result that we want in the third year, then they'll go with someone else. It's kind of like what happened with Giovinazzi, kind of, for example. I mean, he had a few years in, and ironically enough, him trying to come back may be the reason why Mick might be in trouble, ironically enough. But personally, I hope he does find a seat, at least for the next year, just to see, what could happen. And this is, reason number 5,028. Why we need more than 10 teams on the grid. It's just, I mean, it provides space for up and coming talent, drivers that are either past their prime or drivers who are looking for a second chance. It provides jobs for engineers and tacticians and mechanics and composite layup people and all of the details there. It can only benefit Formula One in terms of its profile to have another team that improves the representation. You might argue, well, my slice of the pie is going to be smaller, but if the pie itself grows bigger as a result of that, then it's not going to matter. So I think people need to just be a little bit more honest about what's going on here and be more open to other teams joining.
That's a fact. 10% of $100 is not the same as 10% of $1,000. So, I mean, just consider it like that. I made that point as well. Like, regardless if your percentage stays the same, if the pie is bigger, you're getting more money. So, I think, like you said, I'm for the growth. And I think we talked about this before. I think 12 teams to me is where the sweet spot is. If I saw 12 teams out there, I would be cool with 12. I think that's, to me, a sweet spot. I know maybe somebody had mentioned 16. I think that's way too much. I think 16.
No, we can't. We can't do 16.
Damn. I mean, the paddock is like 2 miles long. Like, what are we doing? Like,
well, I mean, not only can we not do 16 for like the actual like obvious reasons, but even just from like an operational perspective, there's not enough garages to have 16 F1 teams and like 20 F2 teams on a weekend. But there's not. It wouldn't work. So I think we need more than 10. but
Yeah, I'm
16
at
is
12.
probably too much. Yeah.
And what are you at? I'm at 12. What number are you at? You're at like
12 or 13
okay.
is really
All
where I
right.
would do 13 upper limit, 12
Okay.
lower limit. Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's about where I am. So let's talk about Mercedes. Where do you sit with their progress as of right now? Just being realistic about where they are right now, because at this point in time, I'm just about trying to measure where they came from to where they are to try to kind of forecast where they may be coming 2023. I think they've made considerable amounts of progress given the debacle that they went through. And a lot of people are out there second guessing, is this the car that we're going to see in 2023, or are we about to see something different? Where do you sit on that?
Yeah. So to be clear, people want to come after Mercedes for various reasons about not being, as dominant as they were in the past. But considering the situation that they found themselves in the first race and how difficult that actually was for them, they're actually only what 35 points behind Ferrari in the constructors championship. They have a realistic chance of actually getting the second place in the championship now. Considering how far back they went, they're actually remarkably close due to all of the retirements and due to the points being taken off by Red Bull and everything else. Mercedes has actually had a very impressive recovery from a difficult start to the season. They've made a car that, in principle, could win a race or two, and without some bad luck and Zandvoort and Hungary and Silverstone and arguably Spain, there may have been some version of events where they could actually win a race.
Yeah.
The difficulty is that's not good enough for Mercedes.
Right.
To be honest, I mean, the full concept of car that they have with the side pod design and the floor design and the wings and all that stuff, bottom line is it's not competitive enough to actually be a force over the duration of an entire championship. But what did we say at the beginning of the season? We said that the performance of the car was being held back significantly by bottoming issues and by porpoising issues that were known
Which you
to
will never look at the same. You said that.
Yeah, I'll never. That will definitely be the factor that is the most important thing in our car. Our car is very fast. We're just being held back by porpoising and bottoming. They've made tremendous progress on porpoising and on the suspension side. With bottoming, I don't even really see it that much anymore. The car's still not fast enough.
Nope.
Yeah. Even if the CFD tells you it's fast enough, even if the wind tunnel tells you it's fast enough, if for whatever reason that does not translate into what's on track, it doesn't matter because it's just what you don't get points for wind tunnel runs. We have to have the car on track, right? So you have to have the car on track, and that's the most important thing. But what I want to emphasize is they have built a car that can occasionally compete for wins. But if you want to win a championship, you have to be able to compete for wins every weekend. And we're starting to see Ferrari fall back from that status now. I mentioned, it may have been on this podcast or it may have been on another one, that over the first half of the season, Ferrari was really dealing with three distinct issues, right? Mechanical unreliability, blunderous strategic calls,
There you go.
and the occasional driver error that was losing a lot of points. Fixing any one of those would have been a positive thing and really helped get them back in the championship. The problem since coming back from the break is there's now a fourth issue, which is they don't have the pace to keep up with Red Bull anymore. They have had the fastest car in qualifying for pretty much the entire season, but now starting at Spa and it's starting to become more and more clear as we get more races, they don't actually have the pace to actually fight for pole in some situations, and if they do, they have to make sacrifices to get the pole that would hurt them in the race. I think Monza is a good example of this. There are a couple of things to kind of analyze. I know that they have tire heating issues, and I know that they have some grappling with technical Directive 39 that may be a factor here, but also Red Bull is getting faster as well. It's not just Ferrari getting slower, it's Red Bull getting faster.
Right.
They are lightening their car, and one of the consequences of lightening your car is that you can't take the weight out of like the center of mass. Like, oh, I'm gonna make my car 5 kilograms lighter. I'll take it exactly out of the center of mass and keep the balance exactly the same. The weight comes out wherever it comes out, and as a natural consequence of that, the center of gravity moves a little bit, right? And so as you're lightening the car, it's actually changing the balance of the car, which might make it more favorable to one driver or another. The net result of which is Max really likes this version of the car a lot. He has
Right.
been, I think I described his pace in the past couple of races as overwhelming to his rivals, in the sense that even when they're ahead, because he had a penalty or some other issue, even when they play around with the strategy, it doesn't actually seem to be enough to stop him in the past couple of races. Now, again, there's
No.
circuit dependent stuff there, high speed, but they're going to have to find a new way forward if they want to actually be competitive. So Ferrari is in a difficult way right now, but they certainly have options going forward.
Are you expecting that by the end of the season, or are you expecting Mercedes to show this pace by the end of the season? Because I'm kind of at, I don't think so. I'm not. I'm also. I find myself not horribly disappointed because after the first few races, I got more tied into, can they legitimately show me the potential of solving the issue? And they've shown me that. And so oddly enough, I know some people disagree with me when I say this. I'm not disappointed in Mercedes. I mean, they came out with a design, they thought it was going to hit the ground running, it didn't. So more of my impressed was like, can they start wrapping their head around this to actually show me that they can solve this problem like I know Mercedes to be? And to me, I think they've shown me that, like, they've made constant progress. And I keep trying to tell people that you can't expect to see this 1,000-yard like expectation of progress change, and like they're going to go from a whole 2 seconds pace. Like, it doesn't work that way. Like if it does, then I mean, I'm not saying that stuff can't happen. I'm just saying it's not realistic to me. So I'm actually kind of pleased with the process I've seen. I'm actually kind of looking forward to the testing season already, because I want to see, like, what are they going to do with all the data? What are they going to do with the wind tunnel time they're going to get? What are they going to do with the car? I'm really excited to see that. And I'm excited to see new drivers come in and then other cars change, and then teams getting a better hold of these regulations and start seeing if this grid is going to come closer together. All of that is exciting to me, although I know it's not very exciting to other people. They just kind of look and say this year is a wash. It's horrible.
No, I mean, I've always said that if Mercedes wants to win, they're going to have to learn something about the car that they built. And I think they've demonstrated that. I think that they know so much more about what they built now than they did previously. I mean, solving the porpoising and bottoming issues is obviously evidence of that. And I think it may have even been James Allison who said that the performance of a car is not really just a function of any individual feature of it, a suspension piece or a side pod design or whatever. It is a reflection of the sum total of knowledge of the organization itself that results in lap time, right?
Right.
And the team just doesn't quite have that at the moment. I think they have learned, however, where their car is strong. It has a bit more drag than would be ideal, and it's better for tracks that have a large number of similarly typed corners. It's the mix of high speed and low speed together, and also bumpy surfaces that tend to get them. Lower speed, higher downforce circuits, I think they're starting to get a little bit better at. Singapore might be a wild card. It's slower speed, but it is quite bumpy, so it's not really clear how that's going to play out. What I would say is that people seem to have a misunderstanding about what technical regulations actually do. And it's particularly acute this time because the technical regulations were sold under the banner of closer racing, sort of in quotation marks. People didn't really understand what closer racing really meant.
Right.
What closer racing means, it does not mean that the slowest car on the grid and the fastest car on the grid will be closer pace.
Right.
That's not what it meant. It meant that cars which are similarly paced would be able to race each other more effectively. They would be able to overtake more easily and fight each other for a greater number of laps. And there's so many people who seem to be disappointed, like, oh, I was told that, Haas is going to win the championship, and I can't believe this. It's the same three again. I mean, it's just, I mean, and here's what's wild about it. Haas is not going to win the championship, but look at how much progress they made.
Right.
Look at how much progress they made from 2021 to now. Granted, they haven't had the same development rate as some of the bigger teams in terms of bringing upgrades. But, I mean, that's a competitive team. Way, way, way more competitive than they were previously. So it demonstrates that, and for the past several years, they haven't been this competitive. So it demonstrates that a new regulation always mixes the grid up, and it always tends to spread things out because invariably some teams will get it right, some teams will get it wrong. They'll explore this new design space and figure out what works. And then in the second season, in iteration 2 of this, you start seeing more convergence on the designs that actually work. And then it's more reasonable to expect closer race pace in that situation because people are converging on the same ideas. It's exactly why 2021 was so powerful. Not only, I mean, we can argue about specifics about floors being cut and who had benefits, and that's a separate story. But having a regulation set stable for a long time, the longer you leave it stable, the better it tends to be in terms of matching pace. The only problem is the stability point that they kind of centered on. It was close average pace, but the quality of racing, the ability to overtake was still very difficult. So really what they're just trying to do is reset that, which is get a new regulation set with regulations that make it easier to overtake, and then let them converge again and get the pace together. So I'm looking forward to 2023 as well. These few years are going to be a lot of fun, and 2026 I'm also looking forward to because for the same reasons, we don't know who's going to be on top. So
right. I would hope that we wouldn't know. Even if we do, I'm the type of person like, hey, you gotta beat them. You salute them until you can beat them. Like I've never been the type of person to see somebody on top and be like, damn, winning somebody. I mean, can somebody just beat them so they can stop winning? I'm like, if you can beat them, I want to see a good competition. I want to see a battle, and if you beat them, you beat them. But if they win, I'm not gonna be mad.
Yeah, I tend to kind of feel the same way, and I'm not going to classify myself as a former Newey skeptic, Adrian Newey skeptic, but I certainly have far more respect for the person and his contribution to the team now than I had previously. I mean, obviously, there are any number of legendary engineers in the history of Formula One, and Adrian is kind of principal among them. But it was never really demonstrated to me in such consequential and obvious terms how valuable someone like that could be until you see what the RB18 actually did this season, the way it combated porpoising and all these other questions. Right. He's worth every penny that they're paying him. I'll just put it that way.
Right. So I'm just saying that with Bryson saying that, Williams, you probably should have gave him that bag. You probably should have gave Newey the percentage he wanted. Then I'm just saying that's why he ended up leaving. But I think Newey does his thing, but I think, and to credit you, I think your point was when we made it before is that Newey is not the only person contributing. Like a lot of people seem to it's all Newey. There's, like you said, there is a team of engineers going through so much data to come together to formulate and develop something. It's not just Newey, although we all know, hey, Tom Brady's on the field, like GOAT quarterback, but somebody's got to catch that ball. Like he's not throwing it and catching his damn self. So I'm just saying. So I think that was your point. So I don't think you discredited Newey. I think that the surrounding people were just so like it's all Newey, God Newey, and you were just more realistic with your perspective of saying like it's just not Newey. He brings it to the team, but so yeah, definitely.
But as I said, he's impressed me in more ways than one this season. So hats off to him.
Right. So we're okay. So now we're gonna go to this in closing. Russell's decision. Call me in. I'm not staying with the team strategy. I want the softs. What was your take on that?
My take is that Mercedes as a team should have known well enough to actually pit Lewis and Russell as a plan together on softer rubber. Right. The idea that they thought that track position would have been so valuable that it could neutralize the softer compounds that everyone around them was getting onto was ultimately mistaken. And George could see that in real time. He could see, I'm being surrounded by people. I'm not going to be able to fight. One of the things that the W13 has been so good at is sort of tire preservation. It seems to be very easy on its tires, but the flip side to that coin is that they can't warm up the tires fast enough. And it gets worse the harder the compound is. It's just the nature of how flexible the material is and how much heat is generated when it moves. So they were going to be pretty much sitting ducks on that soft, as Lewis was on the harder rubber. I can understand Russell's perception of the situation and desire to take matters into his own hands and pit. But to be clear, he was not called into pit. That was his move that he made on his own. Mm-hmm. I would say a deeper problem is why didn't Mercedes react to what the other teams around them were doing And granted, there's not a lot of time available. There's, if you can double stack these cars, it would be tight anyway. But at a minimum, they could have, I'll say,
Okay.
had a different response to what the other teams were doing and realized that the softer tire, even a scrub set, doesn't have to be brand new. Just even scrub set of softer rubber would be better than the tires they were currently on. In terms of Russell and the claims of selfishness and things that he was doing,
Yeah, I've heard that too.
I don't really have any issues with the decision that he made. I would like that he not do that, considering that his position was perfectly placed to help secure a victory. And as Toto said, they're going for a win. They weren't going for a conservative strategy. They were going for a win. The problem is the strategy they were using to get the win was not the correct one. And I think the way I would always view this, and this is what I said from the very beginning about Russell, Russell's not a number 2 driver at all. He's also never been viewed by Mercedes as a number 2 driver. What he is a number 1 driver in training. And he happens to be under the training of the living legend, 7/8 times world champion Lewis Hamilton. Right. And that was always going to be the relationship. Now, granted, drivers are staying in Formula One for more years than they ever had before. They're setting record-breaking length careers, as you mentioned before with Alonso. I think Lewis has a few more years in him, and there may come a time when Lewis and George come to blows or what have you. But the reality of the situation is they're not even. The W13 was in such a state when it started the season. They aren't even in a position to be able to actually have a fight between drivers because Lewis, and initially in the season, I'm sure Russell has to do at some point too, they had to go with experimental setups. They had to carry extra sensors on the car just to figure out what it was doing, right? The fact that you had to do that kind of skews the picture of who was a better driver over the course of a season and all the other factors involved there. So I don't even think this year is a good year to even try to establish how potentially hectic that relationship could be. They were kind of just in this sort of triage mode, emergency, figure out how to make the W13 competitive. And then once we're kind of on the right track, then work it out after that.
All right. Well, hey, man, as always, you come to the party, you bring the bottles, you bring good sense of humor, you bring all the jokes, and you know what? We have a good time, man. I always enjoy it. So, are you enjoying your podcast as much as you may enjoy being a guest, or are you not, or is it just different? You're enjoying it, but it's a different experience for you, being that you're now running that podcast, because you've been running Twitter Spaces like before, but how is the difference between the Twitter Spaces and your podcast been for you as far as being a guest?
It's never really a thing for me in terms of something that I necessarily want to grow and become a huge part of what I do in my daily. It's really a way to document conversations, and it's a way to explore things and actually start conversations that I wouldn't actually have an opportunity to do otherwise. For example, maybe I'll be able to talk to someone that's currently working in a Formula One team. Maybe I'll get a chance to talk to an IndyCar driver. Maybe I'll get a chance to talk to some engineer that I would never get a chance to talk to otherwise. That's a useful thing to me, and I think it can be useful to people in a wider space as well. I do always try to recognize that there is a gap between the highest levels of technological accuracy in describing Formula One and what the average person knows. And what I'm trying to occupy is a space that kind of bridges that gap. It's not always easy, and I love getting into too many details, and so I have to always press back a little bit and say, if someone doesn't know what kinetic energy is, this is what it is. This is Newton's second law, blah, blah, blah. It's very instructive for what they're doing, but also in terms of me understanding it. So it's been a good time, and it's a fun project, I think.
Man, I'm loving it, and I'm glad you've done it. A lot of people have been wanting you. Sometimes people can want things that we don't necessarily want, but I think what you're doing in the space that you're working in, and the information and the dialogues you're having, I think it's going to work well for the culture, man. So I always wish you the best with that. And that is going to be a wrap up. Y'all thank Bryson for coming back to the Wolfpack fam. Bryson, I thank you. I really do appreciate it, man. I'm loving to see you grow, bro. I think this is just like really the beginning for you. I think
Also,
you're gonna have.
thank you for my hat.
Oh,
I got the hat.
shout out. Hey, Bryson is fam. He got the Wolfpack lid, so that way you out there, man. That sun get beaming. You just put that Wolfpack cap on, man, because I know how it is.
No, it's not gonna help. I'm finished. I'm clearly done. It's not gonna help.
All right. And on that note, well, Performance Talk is out. Thanks for watching another episode of Wolfpack Performance. Don't forget to check out some of my other content on Formula One and motorsports topics. Like, share, subscribe, and we go live on the weekends. See you soon.